be here, Clifton. Thanks for grabbing some time.
Absolutely, man. And I love it because I came up with this idea of interviewing incredible founders. And then thanks to Sam Parr and Jordan Deprecia, like they were able to put together this awesome community inside Hampton. And I joined 6 months ago now. And I have just been surrounded by incredible founders with incredible stories. And so thankful for them for putting that together and putting us all together for moments like this.
Couldn't agree more. I'm a new member of Hamptons, and it's unbelievable how much great talent there is there. And there's nothing better than getting the ego of a founder to talk about themselves. So here I am.
That's right. It was a beacon signal. I mean, so
Exactly.
much
You
good.
put up the
Everybody's
bat
like, "You want
signal.
me to
Yeah.
come in and talk? That sounds great."
Want me to talk about me? I'm there.
Yeah, come on,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, I
Easy.
love to start
Yeah.
these off, Josh. Just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with Blue Orange Digital.
Yeah. So Blue Orange Digital is actually my third company I've started. So I've been founding kind of serial founder for a minute here. And I feel like with most of my journey, got just pretty lucky by having good people in my network that have had needs that I could offer, but also drawn me in and supported my learning throughout founding a bunch of companies. But I got into really doing kind of tech founding when I was originally en route to law school, and that was my journey. And didn't really feel like that would be the trajectory that quite fit my needs. And I had been my first company, actually co-founded out in DC, was focused on education technology. And amazing, I was brought into that company through one of my friends, the CEO, and worked with him in the past. But he needed a tech guy and needed somebody to kind of help with building out their team. And I, kind of divert from my path to law school, go get hired at the company, brought into the company. It's just three of us in this row house in Georgetown. And the first day he walks in, there's papers everywhere, and he's like, man, sorry to say, it's like we just made this big move to Washington, D.C. I walk in, and he's like, hanging up. He's like, we're running out of money. We're shutting down, papers everywhere. Can you help do some stuff with the lawyers? And I'm like, sure. I dive in. I'm like, that's a big change. So day one, he runs off, takes a phone call, and I find out that apparently he uh, was just joking, and it was actually right in the thick of raising our seed round, and we were doing due diligence, and I'm just diving in, figuring out legal for our first day. And so that's day one of my
No.
first company with my co-founder messing with me. We knew funding was coming, but he forgot he did the joke, went off, took a phone call, and then I'm left thinking we're going out of business when we're actually on the rocket ship. And that was company one, kind of really good people, but definitely razzing back and forth. But so first company just led through. I kind of was a little bit out of my skis on that one when we grew pretty quickly. Grew up to like 400 people in the first few years of being there. I uh, didn't really have the foundation to catch up with that scale, so it was just it didn't fit particularly well for me. Just growing to professional leadership when I didn't have the skills for that. So I was really good in 0 to 1, really good at founding and keeping the kind of train on the tracks. But I went off and started another company with a couple co-founders in the HR analytics space, which from all the hiring and growth, it was kind of organic fit, but I was helping with the data platform on that. And then when we exited from that company, it's kind of a tricky exit, if you will. My team that I had met through that team, the data and engineering team, kind of were available through the exit transition. And so I was very tight with them, and I just moved organically into kind of supporting the analytics and data infrastructure that I've been doing to monetize that business. So Blue Orange was really an organic offshoot of my second company, and this network that I built around really excellent data engineers and data scientists in San Francisco that we built. A lot of them were moving out of the city and wanting to continue to work on some of the services functions of the projects that we did, but also some of the areas of expanding to new market cap. And so that's where Blue Orange was formed, was building out this company that was just the best of class of kind of leading edge cutting edge technology in this incredibly important spaces in 2015, where data has been growing at double digit compound annual growth, and then there's been a huge explosion of complexity in it because there's a lot of technologies that emerged and then a huge amount of funding that followed it, which
Right.
spawned just complete, it's called the modern data stack, and this kind of confusion in the market space. And now we're in the contraction of it, which is fantastic. It's still growing in net usage, but the contraction of these tools are just allowing what our kind of core mission was, which was to help companies just be better with how they used data. And that's through simplicity. It's building systems that are architected well, building data models that make sense, leveraging tools that are kind of cohesive and transparent, building kind of standardization and consistency in it, and then training people how to be data literate. So that's a lot of our mission now as a professional services agency. We work with a whole bunch of companies. We've grown to 150 team members and take a couple round of financing. And so it's been a long journey here in the last 9 or so years to get to a place where we really feel like we're making a lot of impact on that front. So
Are you a solo founder with Blue Orange?
I have a co-founder in this company. So my head technologist, which I worked with at my first company, EverFi,
Right.
he went off and so we worked together in the startup phase there. He went off and helped build and grow the machine learning tooling division at Capital One. So we went off and got some kind of big system thinking on it. But we've always been looking for an excuse to work together. And again, that was just, we're just, he's probably one of the sharpest minds I know in the space, and we really like each other. So, which is always a great founding pretense for any company. And so, I started the kind of first version of Blue Orange Digital prior to that in 2015, and we kind of got serious about growing. And so I talked him into working with me and kind of he became my co-founder of kind of the version of this company at scale and growth like in 2017 or so. So yeah, I've been doing this for together for a while, and it's really an amazing mind, but also it's always good to, I think one of those most, he's probably the most durable and long-term partnership that I've had in professional and personal. Like I've been dating my partner for less time than I've been with my business partner in this capacity. I've had
Wow.
investors for less time, so he's probably my most durable partner, which is pretty exciting. Yeah,
Nothing better than a great co-founder, for sure. I
it
love
is
that.
true. I feel so fortunate for that. It's not never like these things are never perfect. Like it's not just like you have your good friend and all goes up to the right and everything's perfect. Never. But it's amazing how much just a foundational trust that I have with him, and I understand reciprocally. And even when tested, it's amazing how we've just gotten better at pushing each other and working through challenges. And that trust that we're both in it in that same capacity has been one of the things that I feel incredibly fortunate for. Actually stepping into the start of this year with we have some changing in our senior leadership at our organization, and which involuntarily wasn't specifically my choosing. We got some really good talent recruited away from us, which happens in our space, and it's just again back to that durability of us kind of sharing a mission and sharing a vision and relying on each other for so long, where that doesn't happen at such a foundational level. I feel incredibly fortunate for, so feeling good about that now.
You mentioned, I mean, data is such a buzzword, man.
It
I've been
is.
in, I come
Oh
from
man.
higher education, right? So I started higher education, went into the
Sure.
nonprofit, been running my own business for over 3 years now. And first of all, there's a FOMO with data. And then one thing I always talk about with our team is tech debt. And I think
Mm,
we could probably agree that most companies and founders are in some sort of tech debt where they've over leveraged themselves with tech that they think that they need, that they're only
yeah.
using a fraction of what they are. So just for the people listening to this that are like, okay, I don't want to miss out on technology that can help me grow my revenue, grow my business, manage my resources. What does like a tech stack from a foundational level when I'm thinking
Mhm.
through I need a tech stack for my business? What kind of principles and things should I be looking at when I do that?
Yeah. It's a big question, but I think our goal is going to keep it simple and high level. And I think first off, I think you bring a really good analogy because I'm a software engineer by trade and kind of came into data engineering. And I think there's an important distinction to understand a little bit of the difference of what you're dealing with when you think about the code that's used to do this. And then I'll get back to your question, which is specifically about
Yeah,
kind of like
absolutely.
tools and how to take advantage. But what I find so fascinating about data and the practice of it, it's the work of data infrastructure and data engineering and analytics work is all at its core software engineering, or you're using software tools, you're using Python, you're using R, or whatever, Scala to interact. So it's still programming. But the difference is that you can build a feature, and even if it's a dynamic function feature, it does the thing. It's an engineering function. If you say the feature does this, it does it. Unless there's bugs, if it's working, it does it. When you're working with like pipeline and data infrastructure and analytics, data is a dynamic entity. It is if you have temporal. Every day new data comes in, it can change. And so you're actually building systems that are, it's much more like the flow of water, if you will. So when you turn on a data pipeline, you know, you have new users, you have new function, you have new metadata that's abstracted from it. So you have to build a system that the constraints of that system are to support a dynamic feed like data that it is. There's really limited, there's a single shot value when you set up data that is not dynamic. You can do analysis, you can get an answer on that question, and then that's it. But a lot of the system work that we're doing is how do we make decisioning at businesses better? And so there's kind of the operational data workload, which is capturing and storing and modeling data that becomes usable from the kind of process of doing business. And then there's the analytics side, which is how do you make it easy to get insights out of it. And so those are kind of two different areas of approach in the data implementation and architecture. But the important question that you're asking is kind of where do you get started? And you kind of have in any process, which is this kind of data maturity lifecycle. And so when you're building out a system, you want to start as simple as possible and only build on to avoid that tech debt, because you're actually going to accrue tech debt no matter what. That's just part of iteration. That's, you can't avoid that with software. You can't avoid it with CRM design. You can't build it. It's just inevitable. So the simpler a system, the better. And so it's, you know, everyone's first data project is a spreadsheet. You know, you start at that level. And when data doesn't, you can't really conform it by the matrices of of a spreadsheet form, you start thinking about, well, do I need to connect it to some form of database? And the first typical form of that is a CRM or something that you're doing customer work in, or something, or an ERP or whatever, you know, a supply chain layer. So you're starting with your SaaS layer. So you move from a spreadsheet version to a SaaS layer. And then you start getting, as you move through that maturity, you need to start unifying systems together. And so you need to connect different systems to get a single lens and start addressing different problems. And again, my argument to customers or founders as they're building stuff is, you know, don't build it, you know, buy it until you have to build it. And that's the answer. So it's like if there's a automated analytics connector, or, you know, you can build something with very low code tooling inside of tools like Sigma with Fivetran, which are these tools that exist where have automated connectors or managed connectors, meaning you don't need technical resourcing to manage it. Some a little bit to implement, but less to manage. And then BI tools like, you know, really kind of out of the box or low code environments that exist out there. That's the first phase. And then you're going to mature into a need for kind of the build version. And that's where a lot of what the work we do is helping mature that, translate that ecosystem into building out a data warehouse and a pattern that's replicable, and incorporating the data model in a way that replicates the business for high priority, high impact ways. That's kind of the stages that you want. So it's a really crawl, walk, run scenario to avoid as much tech debt as possible, to accrue the data, and then you arrive in a state where you can build a project that can be measured against something that's tangible business value. You're saying this problem would cost us this if we don't do it. You implement a proof of concept and an iterative development phase of a data architecture, and you arrive at a solution that works perfectly, or not work perfectly, that's a misnomer in tech projects, but a solution that can justify the expense. And that's something that's trackable and tangible. And that's a lot of the work that we think about is how do you, before implementing a system, think about it in kind of iterative, provable states, and then build it against some trackable return on investment, that it makes sense that this business problem warrants a solution. And so that's kind of the stages where hold off, hold off, hold off on doing anything meaningful of a build scenario, and buy, start lean, become data literate. And then when you find the meaning that you don't have, or the lack of insight in a system you have, that's when you can start flirting with the idea of, well, this is worth investing in from that stage. And then from there, there's ever maturing. And that's where we go from, you know, work with a lot of mid-market clients with huge data practices and large teams. And there's then really good tooling that exists in emerging that consolidated market space that you're coming to navigate. But it's, you know, starting to answer, how do you get to the business value and cost benefit analysis of how much a tool will solve some of these needs versus how much you need to kind of hire and have humans in the loop on it. And that's a lot of what we're kind of defining in the market space. And that's a lot of where we come in and help both implement and help companies to make those decisions, both on the kind of technical consulting side and implementation.
And I think that all starts out with analysis, right? And like kind of really defining the problem. And I think there's a science and an art to it. So like when you go into a business, there's a bunch of data. You have to understand the motives behind the business and what they're trying to accomplish. And I'd love to for you to kind of dive in from an analyst standpoint and an understanding of the business standpoint. How can there be improvement in this area when it comes to analyzing a business's data and then implementing changes?
So it's such a good question. And so, kind of framing what I'm hearing in this, and correct me if I'm off, it's, I think there's the work of doing data infrastructure, but it's serving a purpose. And I think that sometimes you can lose that thread at points when you're building a great system or trying to think about tools or all this. And it's like, but what are we serving? And I think that question remaining at the forefront, one of the bigger areas that I find, super important in this industry is that data practitioners and data analysts need to be good at the business. Actually, I think that's a really big kind of headline that um, you can be excellent at technology, you can build great, ETLs and data pipelines, and think about the, implementation of data modeling and connect tools really well. But there's always a betterment of a system when somebody understands what you're serving. And so you think about that classic analogy of the like the parable of like the blind man and the elephant with analytics, where it's like, kind of three blind men and they go in and they're feeling around an elephant. One grabs their trunk and so they're like worried of like how much do we have to be concerned about this new creature, an elephant that walks into the village, and it's like, they feel the trunk. It's like, oh, it's a snake, so I bet it's venomous and scary. And it's like, oh, they feel an ear, and it's like, oh, that's a fan. It's a complete, to cool myself. There's no threat. And it's like, oh, they push the torso, and it's like, oh, it's a wall. They can't come over. You can do that in data so quickly. It's like, you can get this is one of my biggest challenges when we're doing machine learning or predictive analytics problems is you can get a really high confidence predictive analytics solution that is accurate on a question, but is there a workflow, or do people know how to use that, or where does that fit is a big thing. It's like, this is really right in this narrow lens, but it doesn't connect in. And so the best process, and this is where both the practitioners, so the people implementing the solution, need to be good at business so they can keep the thread. And just as much as you need a non-technical business stakeholder or an analyst needs to understand the data literacy, there's the inverse of that, which the practitioner or the implementer or a no-code solution execution needs to understand the business practice. And so there's this, bifurcated solution that if you lose the thread on either of those two cases, that's where projects go off the rails. So keeping the forefront and a lot of the mapping of a data project is, what are you trying to solve? What decision do we need? Would we be enhanced? And I think there's this other area that when I'm trying to think about machine learning and all this, we have all this amazing output of where AI can be applied. But we've been doing, traditional machine learning solutions, and the very simple play that when I'm trying to teach or explain what machine learning does and function is, if you were just to take out anytime you see machine learning, you've just swap it for prediction. That's it. And so it's like, well, then the question is, what are you trying to predict? So if you could get machine learning, whether it's classifiers or regression models, whatever you're applying, if there's a business problem that you can understand that if you could enhance with a better prediction, then you can start classifying the rules of like, okay, you have a customer lifetime value. And so if you're trying to understand your marketplace, can I do a predictive customer lifetime value? And so that's a very common application in marketing that you can say, is this customer like another customer that's very good to us? So we now know what the prediction function is. So if I had a better way of knowing with very little information about a customer, what would I do with that is now the actual information. Assumingly you can get good prediction, but if you don't answer that, I could produce you a very good uplift model or CLTV, a predictive CLTV machine learning model. But if you don't know what you would do with that predictive function, that's where projects fail, is that's not
Right.
understanding the business function you'd apply. Oh, we know how to do a targeted marketing effort, or we can do a incentive for this and test which works better. And there's feedback mechanisms, there's the resourcing of it. It's the connection to the business process that's the necessary part there.
How does micro failure play into all of that?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I'm really bullish on, that I find there's this kind of space that I think there's some stat that floats around, and I don't want to misattribute it, but like that 35% of machine learning projects fail. And I think that extend that out to data projects and software. We rebuild these things over and again. But there's this interesting thing that in if you take like agile practice as you think about what you're doing, it's not the perfect, like there's contentions to agile, but if you think about how if you want something to be really robust, the process of development of it should allow for failure in it. And so this is the example of like, I'm a pilot. And when you train to be a
Right.
pilot, you cannot crash your airplane. That's just not an option. So you have flight sims and you have training programs that allow you to go out and make small mistakes readily and regularly. A dangerous pilot is somebody that hasn't been tested on this engine. There's this concept of a 100-hour pilot, and it means they have enough confidence to know how to do the basics, but haven't been tested on a lot of the edges, and they're getting a little more confidence. And so there's this concept in building, taking the same principle over to build out data analytics for those types of projects. Is how do you come to the idea of incorporating uh, like testing feedback loops or failures. And so there's smaller tests and they allow for iteration. And I think that's one of the things that I've always found, that like when a big data project fails, you try to kind of plan this large waterfall effect, meaning like plan all the features that it wants, and that's just not the way that data works. You're doing tests and iteration. So build a system. I think it's part of data literacy, is being able to test a theory, see if it's right or wrong, and then iterate on it. And that's a big chunk of this concept of like, when you're starting an analytics project, before you do machine learning, before you build a dashboard, you really want to start this concept of exploratory data analysis. And it's just the idea of going in and saying, where is the there in your data? What are the signal versus noise? What are the correlations that you know you can have confidence in? And you kind of want to never get out of that phase when you start an iterative project. So you're actually building a mechanism of allowing projects that can fail as part of building the robust solution. And I think that that's how you build robustness in a system in any other case. And frequently it's like, we're going to build a data architecture. It's like building an application. And that's not really the solution of what data analytics is for. So I think that building that iterative feedback mechanism, incorporating A/B tests, allowing this like time to insight window of short periods, and then taking what's out of that to both learn for iteration and implement based on that, is kind of the foundation of guaranteeing success and building robustness into a data practice.
Okay, let's take a step back from data. You ready for that?
I love it.
Let's do it. I'd love to kind of get into, okay, third company,
Yeah.
two very successful exits on the first two. Where are we at with Blue Orange Digital from day one from a revenue standpoint? And what does this year and 2 years from now look like?
Yeah. So this is a great question. We're in the deca millions of annual revenue here. I think that's the resolution that we're public on as a company. Um, so that, which is a great hurdle. I think if you look at the kind of sorting function of a professional services agency, I kind of look at us and our kind of punching out of the awkward teenage years, where it's the kind
Mm.
of, if you look at a huge amount of professional services, there's a massive long tail distribution if you look at the tax code 54, which is the kind of long tail distribution of consulting agencies. You have a lot of very small companies. That's a lot of 2 to 20, and that's kind of where they sit. And that's a vast majority. I think you're looking at like 80% of all registered consultancies and professional services firms sitting at in the United States. And then the huge distribution of the revenue, there's global system integrators that exist. So those are the big guys, the Accentures, and in our space, you have Slalom and Infosys, and they're just very, very big companies, those types of ones. Then you have this kind of a reasonable amount of revenue that goes into companies that are kind of this boutique size, but can service a little larger client. That's why we do a lot more of like servicing mid-market clients. And so we've punched into that kind of north of, over 100 employees, north of 10 million in revenue. And our kind of trajectory as it exists is we don't sell and be assimilated into another company, which is not my goal, is to continue our revenue growth up to kind of north of about 30 million in revenue, is kind of that next tier where you become, as a company, a platform company. And this
Mm.
is our ambition. And so instead of becoming a platform company or platform product or a tech where you integrate other systems and processes and marketplaces into your own app, in the company pretense, especially in professional services, when you get a funding partner, particularly private equity in this case, they take some range of minority investment in the company, or somewhere around, usually around half plus or minus the equity range. And then you go out and build a entity on that both through inorganic growth and acquisition, and just expansion of services, usually vertical integration in that way. So that's what our trajectory is right now. We're kind of in the growth, growing out of those teenage phase and that maturity of platforming our company. And so what that means is really focusing on making sure each part of our company is good, not just for what we need to serve now, but making it robust and procedural for the next phase of growth when we start bringing other organizations in or bringing other partnerships or strategies or different technologies. So right now, as a company, we're very end-to-end data focused. We partner with Databricks and kind of Snowflake, the leading like analytics platforms, and do a lot of work in that space. But we want to make our company itself robust. And our plan is, within the next 2 years, probably like 18 months, where that transaction window from now will make sense. There's a lot of demand in the market space to do it early, but I also think it's the death knell of a business to do that too early because you don't have the strength in the system, you don't have the kind of process in play to assimilate and kind of absorb other either business processes or companies. And that's the core focus now, is not only delivering excellence for our clients, because that's the only way you grow, but also building systems so we are the platform as an organization. And so I think that's where we're kind of in that growth phase, both on revenue and process orientation, to get to our kind of next phase right now.
How do you handle that, man? How's that feel on a day-to-day basis? What's a day in Josh's life look like?
Well, I think one of the things that I like as a entrepreneur, or I guess even a founder in general, is that um, and maybe at this phase company as CEO in general, is you're kind of like always trying to point towards the most pressing problems and the most pressing opportunities. You want to balance your time between those two things, kind of a logarithmic distribution on each side. You want to be very, skewed to the biggest issues that you have at front, and how do you make the most expansion in your company. And I think that changes frequently. So a day in the life of Josh is like, it's varied, right? At giving points, it's very much so, what problem becomes the most pressing and what opportunity becomes the most opportune is a changing state. And I love that. That thing is the coolest part about it is, I think every CEO sells. I sell a lot, which I like. But then there's parts where you're trying to enable a team, you're trying to support a partnership, you're trying to ensure a client is really well taken care of and supportive. And that's both, client expansion, but also value expansion. And so, but then you also have to balance this time, as I mentioned, of building a platform, of making sure that there's, a good infrastructure in place, and we're kind of on a trajectory at the right, like you brought up early, that kind of the tech debt. Well, there's like, you can do procedural debt too. You can build a company that's too much process in the wrong way and inhibits something that you need for growth, or you can not put process in place and just kind of be sloppy and mediocre. And so there's that balance of how do you not premature optimize your business. And so I kind of sit between those two kind of demands of my company, of identifying and solving the best problems, or the biggest problems, and going after the biggest growth opportunities, and then balancing that third chunk of, are we on the right track of not premature optimizing, but building the right process level in our business? And so I kind of try, when I'm doing a good job at my job, which is not always, to balance those three things at the right priority that I decide, like to be intentional about those three priorities. And I look at my checklists and my items in those three categories. There's a, you know, triage, uh, system improvement, or procedural, like back office, corporate structure and governance problem set. And then there's about market opportunity. And I think those are the three areas I look at everything and filter. And they're not always equal, but as I
Right.
choose and hope, I choose a percentage, like, okay, we really want to focus on growth, market opportunity, or solving a problem. I can prioritize that, and I try to align tasks and actions to those groups. And I'm a big framework guy, as you can probably hear as I talk about this stuff. So I just say, okay, I'm 50% on that area. And so that's what becomes, I'm making sure that the grouping of tasks kind of lies in that bucket. But that's kind of the kind of ran the overview, and as how I think about my day to day. So pretty high level still. I can get more tactical if you want to go into those areas, but that is kind of how I think and operate. When I'm doing my best, is kind of a proactive area in those buckets.
I love it. I love it. I think I want to throw a curveball question at you.
Great,
How long
love it.
have you been an entrepreneur your whole life? Would you say you came out of the womb as an entrepreneur?
It's a good question. It's not. I definitely now would say yes. I don't know if I always thought that when I was, the whole way growing up. I think there's more
Right.
of characteristics that were ingrained into me or trained into me that I would say are incredibly entrepreneurial. Like, I'm from Maine, and I have a strong Maine identity with grit as one of those things. And I think if there is a trait that entrepreneurs have, is grit. It's having that piece in there. And so I think that's one of those areas of being able to, I think there's a lot of traits that you need to an entrepreneur. It's not just grit, but that is one that I think is incredibly important. And somebody that shows, I think a lot of, you probably heard all of us read the literature and our founding audience of, a lot of these overnight success are like 5-year overnight success, and they're hard, and you have to build those, and that durability and compuncture of it is necessary. And so I think those are types of things that I have always had, and I've always pursued hard things, and I like challenges and those things. So there's a lot of component of how I've always been that I think fits me very well for this. If to
Right.
be fair and honest with you, I don't think I came out the womb thinking identifying as entrepreneur. It only as I
Right.
got lucky and kind of joined a startup, and I'll be honest, like I was much more law school focused at the time, so I wasn't reading and assumed by the tech entrepreneur kind of media hype that we have and the sycophantery that exists inside of that. That wasn't my immersion when I started my first or joined as a kind of first co-founder of the first company. So I don't know if it was like in retrospect, it made all the sense, and it's like I kind of settled into where I need to be. But I would say yes and no. And to some degree, I kind of fell into it by happenstance as much as it made total sense.
What was the hardest day of your life?
Oof, hardest day of my life. Hmm. Gosh, I don't. I'm trying to think. That's a good question. I will say this that it is because of how I've defined my life being very so like I am incredibly like I prioritize work as a thing that I bring a lot of joy into my life for a lot of challenge and excitement. So I'm a wonderful partner and she's amazing and that's a great part of it. I'm very tight with my family and all these things are great pieces. Um, but the most extension of my identity has been through work. And especially when I'm less battle tested, I think on my last company it was kind of a hard exit and transition away from it. And
Right.
then this one has ups and downs like anything, but I feel a lot of identity coupled with it because it's such a big focus of my life. And so the hardest days, I don't have like specifics, but
Right.
I feel the most impact and feel like fight or flight response and durable, like things that just feel really existential to me most in the businesses that I've run. So the worst days of my life are definitely going, if I were to think back, are tied to seminal moments that feel existential to my business, coupled to my identity. Because
Right.
inherently, as a founder, you get, this is your baby, and this feels very a lot of a lot of impact of like bad things happening to it. And so when those are successive and they feel, and I don't do a good job, practicing mindfulness or stoic principles of disassociation or whatever it may be, then I think that would probably be the days that I felt the worst overall. But there's not a single thing that sticks out. It's just kind of the aggregate of those events that
Right.
pop out in areas that I could probably like, if I was more focused, I could get back to examples on. But I think that's the
Yeah.
piece. It's just that the commingling of my identity in a business that when you have something that hurts a business, even if it's not existential, and I feel like we've built something robust enough to feel it, but my stress has certainly decreased as my company has have become more stable and robust, and that's probably a lot to it. When you're living your kind of life, your company is very early stage in its incubation. Things can feel pretty existential, and there's a lot of identity that's coupled with that. It gets pretty risky. So I think that's kind of the broad answer.
I know you're on your third business, and me being on my first, I have so much to learn. But I think the biggest frame that I've kind of gone through in my short time as a founder so far is whether anything great or terrible happens on a daily basis, which sometimes it changes by the hour. Um, I kind of can't call what it's going to do. I can't ever tell if it's a good situation or a bad situation,
So true.
and I think and that applies to many areas of life. I think I take it to my marriage, I take it to how I raise my kids, but whenever you're going through life, running a business, growing, scaling, I think we put a lot of weight on individual moments. And when you have a clear vision of where you're wanting to go with your life, you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that every single moment, good and bad, is gonna take that to get there. You know.
Couldn't
And
agree more. I think the more, and like I love that saying that relates directly with that I repeat all the time. Nothing is ever as good or bad as it seems. It's just like, and that it's a little bit of a derivative. I think your point is more salient around like the fact that in business it's like I don't know when things I think are bad turn into good and things are good don't yield, and it's like so you can't ride those highs or ride the lows. I think you have to be fair on both sides. So I often it's like in any circumstance it's like this isn't as good or as bad as it seems, and positive things and negative. It's a really a good thing to keep the kind of equilibrium on that.
Yeah, I think you've had a lot of cool success stories over the years working with clients. I'd love to hear your favorite story going in from a data standpoint and where a client started and how you helped them through it.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I'm a big nerd on this stuff. I love hands-on. Like I'm a data engineer, and so I like getting the weeds on stuff. So I think the thing I'm most excited about with client work are twofold. It's rooted in uh, some solution that's really interesting. I like so that I have a couple examples I'd be happy to talk to. But the second is something that a client really just groks or like gets adopts the tools and really takes ownership of a solution in certain ways. Those are the two things that I think are the most exciting. And there's lots of reasons why. But like when you feel like you're able to make impact, like data can make huge impacts as in pretense. But I think those are the two areas that most excite me. So I think I was thinking back, we had a work in a number of different areas. So one time we were working with, I actually like the problem more too. It's this idea of working with a large real estate firm that has tons of data, but they wanted to make it easier for how they could do like do market analysis that they were doing that they did pretty bespoke, and they wanted to automate and that process. And so effectively coming in and really kind of overhauling with this big, really important thing in data engineering is called data modeling, and particularly with this area of geospatial, which is a lot of how you like take data and map it to, make it on a map, make it in a geospatial environment. Building a data model, we took a really unique approach that was kind of specific to this client. And to this day, it's still the way that they've kind of overhauled not just how they do this data analytics space, but it's also how they kind of do their bespoke one-off reporting, and it's just more effective. And so I think that type of stuff, when you actually see the tooling hit the business layer, and again, the downstream thing is like massively enhanced property valuation. They're able to sell more, like going right against their business. That's incredibly effective. But it's just incredible thinking about the way that you think through a problem. It's that going back to that understanding the business model and understanding the need, and just putting some smart people and smart thinking against that, and then building a system has changed that massively. Project we've been working on for a really long time, which I've liked because I've watched it mature, the organization mature in their data literacy. We work with a top private equity company, and they have just taken the bet on the market of going all in on using really sophisticated data techniques to keep with their sourcing and their analytics and their their downstream, like how they process all their portfolio analysis. So it's really impressive to see that company mature, and we've kind of been through even 5+ years with the client. And so it's seeing we built multiple phases of this technology at different maturities of an organization, and they've been very invested. We help with training, and going back to those questions of not only does our team understand their business model as like a data practitioners and analysts and machine learning providers, but their entire company, even how they hire analysts and how they get trained in this organization, is using and collaborating with the tooling, and they're just better. It's unequivocal. They have more insights. Their performance has gone up. It's like the amount of time for sourcing has decreased. It's like these crazy metrics that they set. We've effectively tacked each of those KPIs. But the coolest piece of it is seeing over a 5-year trajectory of watching the emergence of different like the maturity, and like working with developing the maturity and growing the expertise. Even some of our team has kind of moved into that company and helped
Wow.
enhance their data literature. It's just having that level of impact, and that's always our goal: is how do you kind of figure out how this company does something better and really get inside that problem. I think those are the type of examples that really get me excited when I'm thinking about it. Last one I'll jump in on here is just an example that we just wrapped up with. I like really complex data problems personally, just because I find that's the one where the more complexity in data, the more output you get. And with one of our large kind of packaged goods companies, they've had huge acquisition success. We got in through one of our private equity partners and helped them overhaul this massive product catalog. And the
Right.
thing that's amazing about it is when they just had clear insights on how they're able to manage their product, they were not only able to decrease their price for customers, but also do it more efficiently. So it was just like on both sides of the margin, they were able to be more competitive just by having a unified ecosystem of their product catalog and managing their supply chain better. So it's pretty amazing, like area where you see a result that is just better. It's not
Right.
on both sides, all fronts, you can measure efficacy. It's pretty impressive. So that's a fun one that we were kind of looking at the results there as well.
I think a common theme I see is just better decision making and better output, right? I mean, when you as a business can display your value better with hard numbers. I mean, listen, I mean, people buy businesses based on output. Like what's
Hmm.
the output, right? And so when you can really impact your bottom line and then overall serve your client base better, you're gonna win. And I think that's where data gets mystified so many times when it comes to, and it's scary. Like it's overwhelming for a lot of people. And so it's really cool to see you going into multiple different industries, not just banks, right, or large data
Yeah, the
sets, but
classic.
going into these almost like boutique in different verticals and showing no data applies to every single one of these. I mean, and people can leverage this in a multitude of ways. So, okay, we're gonna wrap up here with just a couple rapid fire questions.
Great.
Um, the first one is I love books. I love reading. My number one book for anybody that I always recommend is Unreasonable Hospitality. It's a book I read every year. It's a book I send to all my clients when they sign with Legacy Builder. I'd love to hear your book recommendation for everybody.
Yeah. I love to read, so there's a lot in the range. There's like stuff on founding. There's stuff in my space that I would say, thinking about like getting to know the impact. I think like a not, we're dealing with all this AI and excitement hype.
All right.
I think it jumps the shark a little bit sometimes on people just brainstorming and philosophizing at a scale. And that's like, I like the idea of just kind of understanding these kind of really tangible ways that kind of predictive analytics and data can make big impact. It's one of my favorite books is it's called Prediction Machines. And it's this book that just ties, there's been a couple versions of it, but the verse version, Prediction Machines, is fantastic. And it ties my two of my favorite topics, but predictive analytics and machine learning to economics. And though that might sound boring to some, it is quite the opposite. The way that the analogies that they do to bring this to life and how they talk about kind of the actual impact of that is just a phenomenal, an unbelievable book for giving. And the analogies are just so good. It's really well written. It's kind of an easier read on that front. So I love that one. Um, I think that we're at our core always, again, I'll bias towards data because that's the thing, a unique lens that we sit in. But I think one of the best traits that we all can upskill at is being good storytellers. And so I think
Right.
that is, it's like when we're talking here, what we think about is how we make stuff relatable. I think in the same right, data is ultimately to communicate well. Like that's how you make decisions, is to get stuff across. And there's this great book called Storytelling with Data. Um, uh, and that book is just fantastic. It's I think it actually helps you be a better storyteller, even as in auditory or in linguistics. But it's really data rooted. But it talks about why we get attention, how you codify and clutter, and the leveraging the power of story to get a message to resonate, but via data lens. But it's actually, I feel like I learn more even on public speaking and storytelling personally through a data assessment of it, like what works and doesn't through efficacy. I find
Right.
it's a very tangible way of translating. So I think that skill set is probably the most powerful skill set of being a good communicator and storyteller. But I like tangible things, and it happens really. So that book is one of my favorites as well. And good
Awesome. Thank
pictures. Good pictures is
Yeah,
great. Yeah,
I gotta have the pictures in the book, man.
that's
If
it.
if it
I
doesn't
never,
have
never
pictures,
far,
it's no book.
stray too far away.
That's right. That's right. Okay, last question. You have a time machine. You go back, you're going to speak to 22-year-old Josh. What do you say in 5 minutes?
Oof, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably stuff around, 22. I'm, punching 30 now, coming up on 30. Oh, sorry, 40 now, and so I wish I was punching 30, but punching 40 now, and I think it's a lot about I think there's this the mindset piece. I've always generally trended on this, but the idea around easier of overcoming imposter syndrome, I think is always one of those things that you get into. It's I think that that lesson, I think we all a lot of people resonate with that one. And I
Yeah.
think we make it too big for ourselves. Like, you grow through with confidence and you can punch through. And I've had no shortage of that. Anyone that you ask that knows me. But I think the framework of being very intentional about what imposter syndrome will inhibit you for you and what it doesn't. I think it's mostly an inhibitor. You've kind of imposter syndrome is just the antithetic of growth mindset and those pieces of effective learning. And at my best, I do that, but I would say being conscious of that, being proactive of ways to not let that take root. I think that's probably one of those areas that, wouldn't point the direction or give the lottery ticket. I kind of think the journey is the point. So I've enjoyed the ups and downs of the journey, and I think it just keeps you better. But I do think kind of the mindset stuff that you take around it, imposter syndrome is probably the one that held me back in different phases the most. So I'd say I think there's stuff that I do now to avoid it, and when I'm on my best and still succumb to it. But I think those are areas of correcting or process around correcting that would be a thing I would probably coach on to 22-year-old Josh. Yeah.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome's real. Whoever says it's not, is lying.
Yeah,
They're just
and it's cyclical
um,
too. I can be incredibly, in the same topics or areas. It's like, I'm not particularly an uncomfortable public speaker, but and even on topics that are hard, I don't mind that. But then at times it can be, and so it's like it's not there's not static. It's just this thing that, with any of these things that are kind of self-originated, there's process of working out of it and not being inhibited by it and leaning into it a bit more. I think there's one of those things that I've always really loved in like a KPI that I have defined for myself for many years, but it's having as many like counting efficacy by being intentionally finding uncomfortable moments. Like, I think that's one of my favorite things is actually like defining success for how much discomfort or things you're uncomfortable with, making sure there's a high frequency of that. That is like one of my success metrics that I consider. I don't care what those are. If a thing is hard, do it and make sure you do that with a reasonable degree of cadence, whether it's there's the classic like sales calling, you're like, oh, that's uncomfortable, but do it. It's trying a new strategy and or assessing things from scratch, doing first personal thinking. These are like uncomfortable exercises innately. So the frequency that you can put yourself in those scenarios, I think, is one of those ways of kind of breaking out of that a bit. But I care a lot about, like, that's a KPI that kind of overarches everything for me, is are you doing enough uncomfortable things, whether professional, social, relationship driven, just making sure stress testing that, I think, is a kind of deliberate discomfort KPI.
incredible. What a way to end it. Incredible conversation, Josh. Thank you so much, man. We'll put
This was a
all your
blast.
relevant links below, man. We'll point people to Blue Orange and all their data needs that they need help with. I would recommend anybody reach out to Josh and his team if you need help with that kind of stuff. Josh, thank you for the conversation, brother, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, it was a blast, Clifton. Thanks for having me on. This was so fun. Thanks.
Absolutely, brother. Boom. Did it.
Fun.
Sweet.
That was a good one.
Great job, man.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. I like a lot of stuff on topic deep in the weeds here, so it's fun to have a little more of I like, I don't know. I don't pitch the me focus, the co-founder interview as often. My PR does other stuff. So